Alright, so I know a lot of people are really hot on Diablo 4 right now, including myself, because I've been having a blast running my sorcerers with my dad's druid over the past several days, but maybe you're not ready to jump on the Diablo 4 train just yet. Maybe you just, never played the original entries, so you're not sure about jumping in on the 4th entry in the series, or maybe you're just looking for an experience that isn't so oppressively dark and gothic as Diablo where you're just hunting down hell's minions. Whatever your reasoning, if you're looking for some fun, top-down action that will still kind of give you that fight, loot, repeat gameplay loop that you would get from Diablo 4, there are a lot of really good games out there that run really well on the deck. So that's what today's video is all about, is I just want to go through some top-down action games. Now to be fair, not every game on this list is a Diablo clone, although I think you would call a couple of them Diablo clones. Rather, these are just a lot of fun top-down action games from my personal library that I wanted to outline here today. Although I will say the first entry on this list is definitely a Diablo clone and really just kind of feels like baby's first Diablo, and that would be Minecraft Dungeons. Now, full disclosure, I don't own this natively on the deck, and rather I've only played it through Xbox Cloud streaming there, but by all accounts, Minecraft Dungeon runs pretty smoothly on the deck from what I've seen so far. The premise is pretty straightforward fantasy fare. A villager named Archie, who is driven out by his people, stumbles upon a powerful artifact known as the Orb of Dominance. And naturally he gets super corrupted by it and becomes the Arch-Illager and is on a mission of vengeance against everyone who wronged him. And when I say this is baby's first Diablo, I don't mean that as a negative. It's an approachable way to get familiar with the genre and just overflowing with the sort of charm Minecraft is known for. No, it's not the only time the Minecraft brand has branched out into another genre, but I do think it's one of the better attempts. It's easy to get connected with friends cross-platform if needed, the controls are straightforward, and you don't get bogged down by trying to sort through classes and talent builds since it's heavily gear dependent. Now that being said, there are plenty of guides for making specific builds, as long as you're willing to put in the legwork to seek out specific items, but I think this strikes a nice balance of fulfilling action and approachable gameplay without feeling overwhelming. And if you want even more dungeons than what the base game provides, there are a range of expansion packs available that open up the story even more if you really get hooked on it. And speaking personally as someone who's jumped back into this game here and there with various friends over the past few years since its release, I can tell you it's a really well-designed time. Both melee and ranged combat feel really good in the game, you've got a lot of the characteristic enemies that you would expect from a Minecraft game within it, and there are a ton of interesting artifacts that will either buff your character directly or provide some helpful bonuses to the other people in your party. And again, even though it does have that cutesy Minecraft aesthetic, make no mistake, there's definitely some challenge here if you're willing to seek it out. Next up, stepping slightly away from the RPG part of the action RPG genre and into the roguelike genre, is Rad. Which, no, I mean, it's literally called Rad, and let me tell you, it definitely lives up to its namesake. Coming from Double Fine and definitely living up to the sort of whimsical presentation they're known for, Rad is an isometric action game where you control a teenager exploring a procedurally generated wasteland. After humanity goes through not one, but two apocalypses, everything in this world has a distinctly 80s synthwave flair to it, and in turn during your runs you'll be collecting cassette tapes as currency, floppy disks to unlock chests, and all of this is set to a synth-heavy soundtrack that would make John Carpenter proud. What makes Rad unique is how the radioactive wasteland will periodically grant you endo and exo mutations. Endo mutations are passive mutations that are always active and might grant you new abilities, like being able to have X-ray vision to see what loot will drop from an enemy. On the flip side, you can only have 3 exo mutations equipped at once, and these will grant you new powers like the ability to chuck your head as a bomb or hurl your arm like a boomerang, and these are definitely an improvement over the bat you'll start off with on each run, and it's a lot of fun seeing what augmentations you'll run across exploring the wasteland. But make no mistake, this is a roguelike, so expect to die over and over again. This sort of luck-based progression might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you're looking for a, well, rad take on the genre with a unique setting, I have to say I'm having a lot of fun with it so far. In fact, I'd say the most fun I'm having isn't necessarily the progression and seeing new stages, but rather just raw curiosity about what bizarre mutation I'll run across next. Because it was hilarious unlocking the Beast Mode mutation and a lot of fun getting a movement speed bump and just straight up ramming enemies thanks to my new centaur legs. My only real hesitation in recommending Rad is that the difficulty can be a little daunting at times, and true to the genre, you can definitely encounter some cheap deaths. And while I do love the retina-steering aesthetic of Rad's saturated world, occasionally the camera can be obscured, and with so many vivid colors splayed all over the environment, it can sometimes be tough to discern, say, a plant from a hidden enemy, so it pays to approach each new area with caution. Still, if you're the sort of player who loves dodge rolling and putting your skills to the test, Rad runs great on the Steam Deck at its default settings and stays very near 60 FPS with only occasional dips. And it's just great fun if you're looking to smash some baddies in an 80s inspired wasteland. And you should be able to get in more than a few runs since it looks like you can get around 3 hours of battery life. And while we're on the subject of mankind's looming dystopian hellscape, this next game is one that I overlooked for way too long, which was a huge mistake because it is an incredibly fun time, and that is The Ascent. Developed by Neon Giant, The Ascent is another ARPG, albeit a cyberpunk-themed one that has a lot more in common with something like Geometry Wars than Diablo, given it's a twin-stick shooter. It's set within a futuristic arcology in a world known as Velis, which predictably is controlled by a megacorporation called the Ascent Group. You'll play as one of the enslaved workers looking to survive this harsh cyberpunk setting, and it's a job that only gets more difficult after the Ascent Group itself loses control of the arcology, and rival factions and corporations start vying for control in a bloody free-for-all. Even though it's technically a twin-stick shooter, it is a little more nuanced than straight up pointing where you want to fire, because you can aim high or low depending on your target, which is kinda cool since you can utilize the environment cover, or blast enemies at a higher elevation. Although admittedly sometimes in the heat of battle it's an easy mechanic to forget about, there's a ton of customization as well between distributing your stats, upgrading your armor with new pieces you find littered throughout the environment, and augments for your cyberware which unlock new skills. You also have an upgradable cyberdeck device for hacking into new areas, and I have to say this thing looks suspiciously like a Steam Deck. All of this is fleshed out with a ton of lore and an incredibly detailed environment that's just a joy to sort of kick back and take in whenever you start exploring a new area. Artistically, they absolutely nail the feel of something like Blade Runner with a good use of film grain and just a dingy but also super colorful array of environments to traverse. Steam Deck performance is good, but not quite exceptional. It looks like the game's frame rate is locked at 30, and I couldn't find a way to adjust this within the game's menu. There might be some way to force it to play at a higher frame rate, but even at around 30 FPS, it's still a lot of fun to play, and I didn't have any practical complaints as the action really heated up. I started off blasting away at what were essentially rats before beefing up to some greater challenges like this hulking opening boss. And if you don't want to go it alone, you don't have to, as the game does include support for local and online co-op with up to 4 players. And I gotta say, out of every game on this list, this might be the one that I'm most looking forward to spending more time with, just because it feels really, really polished. Not flawless, but I do love all of the extra effort that they put into not just making sure the mechanics were sound, but that there was also a world to explore them with that was actually interesting, which isn't always the case. If you've never tried The Ascent before, you should definitely give it a go, particularly if you've been looking for a fresh sci-fi spin on what's often been a genre that's kind of reserved for the fantasy setting, or if you just want to get even more pumped for Alien's Dark Descent next week. Now, next up is a really colorful game that I had all but forgotten about, and I believe this debuted on the 360 back around 2010 or 2011, but I did not play it until at least 2012 when it came to iOS, and that is Bastion. Bastion was originally designed by a small team of just 7 people, but it is an incredibly fun and vivid action role-playing game with a more traditional level structure. You'll be playing as the Kid and making your way through a variety of fantasy environments that are just incredibly lush in that oil painterly sort of style. It kind of reminds me of Braid's presentation, just rather than a 2D platform where you've got a top-down isometric action playground of surreal environments to traverse. You can carry 2 weapons at once, and in no time at all you'll be outfitted with a hammer, a fang repeater for dealing with long-distance threats, and a shield for dealing with enemy projectiles. As you accrue black tonics, these can be used to execute special moves, and over time you can increase your capacity for said tonics to become even more deadly. In between blasting and dodging your way through each level, you'll get opportunities to rest up at the Bastion where you can use fragments to buy materials and upgrade your armaments. The Bastion itself can also be upgraded with new structures that serve different purposes, like providing you upgrades, or upgrading the strength of your foes to in turn grant you more XP to level up faster. It's not the deepest action RPG I've ever played, but it really does pop as a unique twist on the formula, and between the gorgeous hand-painted 2D artwork, excellent narration, and a banger of a soundtrack that punctuates the chaotic on-screen action, it's definitely worth a look and performs flawlessly on the Steam Deck. And finally, last but not least, is a free-to-play title that I'd always heard rumblings about but never explored myself, but I finally decided to go ahead and take the leap and give it a shot, and that is Path of Exile. Now, this game is probably the most like Diablo on this list, and it wears its influences pretty shamelessly on its sleeve. Path of Exile has you playing as, well, an exile. Specifically, one of 7 different classes of exile in a dark fantasy setting not too unlike Diablo. The premise is that the High Templar Dominus has exiled you, the player from the land of Uriath, for your crimes, and in turn you're set to Rayclast, a penal colony where you'll take on quests, mow down all manner of baddies, and just generally take in a range of quests like you'd expect in the genre. Now, I'm way early in this game, but already I'm kind of blown away that this is a free title because it is showing a whole lot of depth here. Almost to the point of being intimidating. For instance, after selecting the witch class and really getting into the game, the first thing I wanted to do was just jump into the menu and check out the skills and abilities that were on offer. I figured at the very least I could start fleshing out some semblance of the sorcerer class I'm running in Diablo 4 right now, but what I did not expect to find was a passive talents area that was absolutely massive, with hundreds of options to slot in. And yet, for all of this complexity on display, Path of Exile does a great job of getting you into the action quickly, and if you've ever played an action RPG before, you'll probably start picking it up pretty quickly. At least it was pretty easy to grasp for me, and in no time at all I was laying waste to zombies on the coast with fireballs and blight, rapidly leveling up my witch without much confusion. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely a learning curve here, but hats off to the devs because there is an expansive amount of well-formatted in-game guides, complete with video tutorials in some portions to help get you up to speed. And thanks to a pretty breezy tutorial, you can pretty much start barreling through the Rake Last immediately to start atoning for your sins, and hopefully fight your way back to Ariath. Also, right out of the gate, this game was running just about perfect on the deck, although I did notice some slowdown once I arrived in some of the world hubs where other players were running around. But beyond that, once I got out into the open world and started mapping the surrounding areas, everything ran pretty smoothly, which probably isn't that unexpected from a game that first debuted back in 2013, but it's still pretty amazing seeing games like this play out on a handheld. Especially considering the scope, and I was very glad to see that it had full controller support immediately, without needing to remap a bunch of controls or anything like that. On-screen text can be a little bit small, but it's not unreadable or anything. So if you're looking for a beefy Diablo-esque experience that costs exactly $0 to jump into, and one that comes from developers that insist on keeping microtransactions firmly within the realm of cosmetics rather than pay to win, you've got nothing to lose checking out Path of Exile. Alright, and that's it for this one. Really what happened was I got rolling with Diablo 4 and I was like, you know what other great top-down action games have I played, or what are some that I've just been neglecting that probably play well on the deck? So these are what I came up with, but hey, what about you? Are there any top-down action games that you would recommend? Don't have to be RPGs, you know, they could be roguelikes, they could be Souls-likes, whatever. I'm just curious to hear what you would recommend or what you think should have been on this list. Now, I know these videos typically drop on Thursdays rather than Tuesdays, but the ROG Ally is supposed to be arriving for me tomorrow, so I'm hoping that I can, you know, kind of get an impressions video of that done, so hopefully I'll have that done by Thursday. But yeah, as always, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.